Hey there guys and ghouls, welcome back to another nearly unwatchable review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Hyper Light Drifter. From developer Heart Machine, Hyper Light Drifter is a 2D action RPG that was released for PC, Mac, Linux, PS4, and Xbox One, and I initially bought this game back when it came out in March, but all things considered I actually wasn't that pressured to get around to playing it. Frankly, it's one of those games that managed to win me over with pretty much everything stacked against it. I'm generally not a fan of the inspired by retro classics kind of indie games we've been seeing over the last 5 to 10 years. They're always, or at least almost always, a pretentious letdown for me. And the throwback sprite graphics style they tend to go for really comes across as lazy more than anything else. But right away, with Hyper Light Drifter, the world is beautiful. It's bright, they use eye-catching colors to portray a world that's really dreary and very clearly in some sort of deep decay. Unlike most of their peers, the developer in this case used sprite art more as an artistic medium to really try something new and creative with their artistic direction, rather than as an excuse for having shit graphics, which is kind of endemic of the entire indie game field that you see out nowadays. Even some of the really popular, otherwise creative games that get released have clearly forgotten that games, like movies and comics, are still a visual medium. You need more than the heavy-handed application of memes and a clever concept. You still need to offer some manner of satisfying visual experience. Thankfully, Hyper Light Drifter offers that and more. I've honestly been rendered speechless several times by the huge visual effects that are presented to you in this game, and that's no small feat. Keeping my mouth shut is a heroic effort. So the fact that a game that uses a graphic style that I am fundamentally biased against can leave me staring in awe as different cinematics play, that's not something that can be brushed off. It has to actually be noticed. It's something that's incredible for me, honestly. Which isn't to say that the slightly top-down 2D look to it doesn't have its problems. For example, there's some platforming elements to the game here and there, and that can really throw you off when you have that kind of forced perspective. Occasionally you'll find yourself falling off the edge that looked clearly like something you could land on. But I feel like that's going to be kind of a fallback to these retro style or retro inspired games, and this is why I usually don't like them. With all that in mind, the options menu is pretty basic. There isn't a lot you can change about the graphic settings, but then again, given the specific style they're going for and the relatively low hardware requirements, I would say it's pretty fair that the developer decided to maintain their artistic vision rather than offer redundant graphical settings. Controller customization is kind of a letdown here. You can more or less fully customize the keyboard and mouse controls, however, the game itself, when you start it, tells you that it's best played with an Xbox or PlayStation controller, and yet you cannot customize the controller configurations at all. Now, in this particular case, I found the default controls to be comfortable, but that doesn't really mean anything when not everyone is going to share my particular preferences. It's a very clear example of one step forward, two steps back. If you're going to allow us to customize one set of our controls, you should give us the option to customize all of our controls. This is just baseline stuff, guys, and its exclusion does modestly undermine the attention to detail you've given every other element of the game. It's incredibly satisfying to win fights. You even do this neat little animation thing when you finish a particularly difficult, or at least with the game interpreted as a difficult fight. You get a range of different abilities and moves, different kinds of utility options, all of which have a pretty straightforward upgrade system. You have merchants that are in the central little town area. Each one focuses on a certain category of upgrade, whether it be your movement abilities, the things you can do with your blade, or what you do with your ranged weapons, all of which are paid for by these small tokens, these bits of currency that you find while fighting monsters and exploring the world, basically out and playing the game. which is really gratifying given, as I said, the combat is super satisfying, and the enemies are really creative. There's a wide range of them. Most of them have very unique fight patterns. They work together in different ways. It's really interesting, especially the boss fights. The bosses all have unique ways of fighting them. They have multiple ways you can defeat them depending on what abilities you've chosen to upgrade at the time that you arrive. And they all have stories. Stories that you have to interpret like everything else in this world, primarily through the visual medium. The soundtrack, which is incredibly haunting, by the way, does lend tone to what you're seeing, but really, the actual things you're seeing, the tiny animations, the details on everything, and there are details on everything. They all tell a story, the story that you want to go out and find more of. You feel compelled to learn more about the story that's drip fed to you and only really discoverable if you make a point to go find it. You have things like runes that you can interpret that actually do translate into language. You have all these tiny stories told by individual NPCs, again, fully through their interpretation of the event as told by panels, as images. And really, everything in this world comes together to make it feel like a real, living, though dying at the time, world. Like a world in the spiral of terminal failure, of death. A world that is coming to an end, and you're trying to find out why, all while still scavenging off of the bones that are left. And it really tends to get to you, but it compels you to keep going further, and further, and further. You always want to find out what the next little clue, the next little hint means. And in that way, you can really start to understand the comparison that a lot of people have made to Dark Souls. A lot of people have compared the game to Dark Souls meets Zelda, and honestly, that's a fair comparison. Maybe a touch of the kind of fast-paced bullet hell or Metroidvania style gameplay too, but when it comes to the tone and the setting, you got a lot of Dark Souls. And given that the tone and setting are what make Dark Souls one of my favorite games of all time, this is honestly the highest praise that I could ever give it. What it comes right down to is that when I look at the stream of indie games that have been released in the last 5 to 10 years, which all seemed hell-bent on trying to make themselves the new living meme among the gaming industry, rather than focusing on building a truly compelling experience, and then I look at this game, all I can think of is a bag of fast food, good fast food, but still fast food, next to a finely crafted gourmet meal. Something that you want to sit down and slowly enjoy. You want to take great, immense pleasure out of every single bite, every taste. And let's be honest with ourselves. Once you've had a meal like that, what use do you have for fast food? I paid the full price for this game right around launch. I am more than happy with my experience with it. Frankly, the base game alone is worth the $25 that they're charging for the soundtrack edition. So if you're in the market for a fun, beautifully crafted indie game, feel free to look it up on GOG, Steam, PS4, or Xbox Live for $20. Totally worth it.